Hello guys, welcome back. Now this is the continuation session of the earlier session, that is learning assignment 14, where we have learned how to use SPE editor prior to writing the service layer of code, where we have implemented functions for testing the endpoint of PnpJS, where we have created create item functionality, read item functionality, update item functionality, as well as delete item functionality. So all these endpoints we have tested using SPE editor. Now in this session, we are going to implement the service layer, the actual service layer, which talks to the SharePoint and perform all the operations on the list. So let's start it. So guys, before starting our implementation, I wanted to reiterate the diagram which we have drawn earlier. So in this diagram, we are going to develop this layer, particular layer, generic service layer, where we are going to write the code for create operation, read operation, update operation, as well as delete operation, and that is on the list. In the earlier session, we have performed all those exercises with the help of SPE editor to validate the PNP endpoint which PNP library is providing. So now the question over here is how we are going to implement this service layer which will talk to SharePoint list, or I can say that what are the steps required to implement the service layer. So let's look into the steps. So guys, to create the service layer, we need to follow, or say we need to perform these tasks. In the first task, we are going to create the folder called services. So let's do it. So I am inside the Visual Studio Code. I will go to the source folder, and over here we need to go inside web parts, and over here we need to create a folder, and we will give it a name called services. So this is our first task. Now the second task is we have to create a PnpJS configuration file. So guys, to use the PnpJS in SPFX, we must have a configuration file which will create an object which will hold the context of the web part. Now the question over here is why we are creating this context object in this PnpJS configuration file. To answer your question, without understanding the context of the web part, service is not able to understand where to perform all the operations which is being defined at the service layer. For example, if you are telling that create an item, then how do the service layer come to know that at which list you have to create the item? So all this information we are passing through the context, and that's the reason we must have to have a configuration file which will holds an object and that has the context of the web part. So let's proceed further and let's write the code for the PnpJS configuration file. So now I am inside the Visual Studio Code, and over here you should select this folder and click on this file, and over here we need to specify PnpJS config.ts. So this is the file where we can write the logic for PNP configuration. So let's do it. So the first step, we need to import the web part context class, and that is coming from our SP web part base. So first we will tell that from, and over here we need to mention Microsoft, and this one you should select, and over here we need to specify the class name, that is web part context. This is our first step. Now the second step, we need to import some of the important classes from the PNP library. So how we will do that? We need to write import, and over here we need to import from PNP library. So I will write from, it is from the PNP/SP. Now from this particular module, we are going to import a class called SPFI. The second one, the next we have to write the capital SPFI. Make sure that it should be capital. And another one is the SPFX. We need to mention SPFX. So we are done with this step. Now let's proceed further and let's import. There is something called PNP login. From this module, we are going to import the log level as well as PNP logging class. So let's do it. I will tell import, and over here we will mention log level PNP logging. So I will tell PNP logging, and which is coming from PNP logging module. So I will write @ PNP/logging. So I will tell logging. Over here you will see that we are getting this red line. That means it is not exist in our project. So to get inside our project, we need to install it. So let's write npm install, and we will tell that @ PNP/logging -- save enter. So this will install this module, and from this module we are going to use log level as well as PNP logging. So this is going to use to perform the logging operations in the service layer. So now you will see it over here. It has completed. It's still complaining, but don't worry, it get resolved. But let me try again, and I will tell that @ PNP logging. Now see here, we are getting it. So now it will go away. and over here it is complaining about this one. So for this case, see here the difference is this P, and it has P small n and capital P. So select this one and remove this one. So now we are good. So now we are done with the importing the PNP logging module. Now let's proceed further. So now next we will create an object and we will call it as underscore sp, and which is of type spfi, and over here I'm initializing with null. So now once it is being done, we are going to create a function which will actually create the context object, or say which will pass the context object to this particular object. Currently it is null, and now we need to pass the web part context object so that the service will understand that on which list you have to perform the operation, and that we can do it through the context object that I already mentioned in our session in this session. So let's proceed further and define a variable. So now let's proceed further and create a function over here. So for this I am going to tell that export const get sp, and over here I will mention context, which is an optional and which is of type web part context. So this is the parameter which we are mentioning over here, and this function is going to be of type spfi, which should return the spfi and object. Now here I will write now over here I will define the body of the function. So let's write over here, if it is null, the object sp is null, and context, the object context is null over here, then in that scenario we need the context. So for that reason we are writing over here it should be double end, and then we will define the body for this, and over here we will mention that if it is null, then you have to create the context object. So let's do it. So I'm going to tell sp equal to, now we will use this smaller one, spfi. So this is the function. Make sure that you are specifying like this, and then you have to mention there is something called it has using, and what it will do, it will create an object of type spfx which will pass the context of the web part, and then we are going to log this as well using PnP logging. And what we have to log, we have to log level warning. So we will tell that log level dot warning. Over here we are missing one of the parentheses. Make sure that you are providing that. So now we are good with this. So now semicolon over here. So now we are done with the creation of the context object. So this particular object holds the context of the web part, and now over here you will see that it is complaining about we are not returning this object. So let's return it. Tell that return the object which you have created for holding the web part context. So over here we have returned it. Now we are done with this step. So our step 2 has been completed now. So let's save it. So now let's proceed further and go to step 3. So let's look into the step 3. So guys, in the step 3 we did a mistake over here. This is the first step because of the copy pasting it happened. So let's delete it. So basically this is the third step. It should be third step, and it should be fourth step, and it should be fifth step. Make sure that we should be doing like this. Okay, sorry for that. Now at the third step, in this step we need to create a PnP service which will perform the actual operations on the list, like create item, read item, update item, delete item. So let's do it. Let's create a PnP services class. To create the PnP services class, I need to select this services, and over here I will create a file called pnpservices.ts. Once it is being done, and within that we need to create the PnP services class. So prior to that, I need to import some of the important modules, and from that important modules we will grab some class that will help us to build this particular PnP services. So first step, we need to import all the objects which we have used earlier, that is our spfi, capital spfi and spfx, and which is coming from the PnP module, PnP sp module into. Now the second step, we need to import webpart context class, and that is coming from the sp webpart base. So let's write import, which is coming from sp webpart base, and the class which we are going to use is the webpart context, because from here we will create the context and that we will pass it to our configuration file. Now the third step over here, we need to import item add result. If you remember that in our SP editor, when we have created an item, when we have created an item within the list, then on that time we have included one of the interface. So over here that we will use it because this is required when we create the create item functionality within this particular service layer. For that reason we require this particular class. So let's do it. This is coming from @PnP. This is coming from SP, and over here from the items module. Class name is over here. This is an interface, basically item add result. Once it is being done, then we need to import this function which we have created over here. So let's write the code to import it. So we will tell that import, and over here we will mention that get SP. You can check the name what you have given. It should be get SP, capital SP, and which is coming from our file, that is PnpJS config. So this is the function coming from this PnpJS config. So now let's proceed further and create a model. That model we will use to extend our PnP services class. So here we will define that my PnP service, what are the operations my PnP services will perform. So how we will write it? We will tell that export interface. I'm going to call it as IPnP services. And this model has 4 operations that you already aware about. We are going to tell that create item. Create item, over here we need to specify where you have to create the item. For this, it should hold a parameter called list name. So we need to specify string type. Then we need to specify that, okay, what are the items you want to insert. So I am going to send it as an object. So I will tell that whatever the item I will send through this particular object, that you have to insert. And I am calling it as any type. Once it is being done, what kind of return type it has? It should be of type promise any over here. Close this one. Now we are done. Now next we have to define the method for reading the item. For that I will tell that get item, and over here we need to also specify that from which list you want to do. So whatever the list, I will pass it over here. From that list you should get me the item. Then we need to specify that what column you want. So for that I am going to tell that whatever the column which I will pass it over here, that column you should return me. So I am telling that it should be of type array, because we are going to pass multiple column name over here. If we want to grab all the information, so we need to specify those columns over here, and which is also a type of promise. Let's write promise any. Now the third operation, if you remember, we are performing update operation. For that also we need to write over here update item on which list. We need to tell that whichever parameter we are going to pass over here. So the list name over here we need to specify. Now the second thing we need to specify which item you want to update it. So for this case, whichever item I am going to pass it through the parameter. So I will tell item ID, and which is of type number. Now we have third parameter where we need to specify that, okay, what value you want to update it. For this case also I am going to tell that I am going to pass you one of the object which holds all the values which I want to update for. So for this case I am going to tell item object, and over here I will mention which is of type any, and again the return type for this is promise any. Now the fourth operation which we want to perform within the list, that is going to be the delete operation. So I will tell that delete item. Then again the same question, from where? From this list which I will pass it here. Okay, which item ID? So I need to specify the item ID over here. Item ID, and which is of type number, and this is of type promise again. So over here I will mention any. Make sure that it should be capital P, promise, semicolon, enter. Now done. Now we have created the model called IPnP services, and whichever the class which will extend this particular model, they must have to implement these 4 functions. So now let's proceed further and create the PnP services class that will extend this function, and within that we need to define all these functions. Currently we have just declared it. This is the model. Whoever the function is who is going to extend this particular model, they must have to define these 4 functionality. So let's do it. So I am going to write over here export class. I'm going to call it as PnP services implements. I want to implement this particular interface, so I am calling it as implement IPnP services, and then open braces and closing braces. So now you will see it over here. This class is complaining that if you are implementing IPnP service, you must have to create item, get item, update item, delete item. You must have to implement these functions. So that is what we are going to do it. But prior to that, we need to create SP. I'm going to keep the same name which we have used earlier. So over here I will mention which we have used in our PnpJS config file, so that we can have the similarities that you will come to know in just a moment. So once you will define this particular variable, over here you need to pass the context to our PnpJS config. Why we are doing that? Let's understand it. So guys, as you know that we are defining the service layer, and from the service layer we are performing all the operations on the list. So to perform the operations on the list, we must require a context, and because of that context we are able to perform all these operations. So that's the reason we need to create the SP object, and through the context object we are passing all the required information to the SharePoint to perform the operations on the list. So now let's proceed further. In this context object, over here it is passing internally the information about the context to the SPFX. So for this scenario we need to create a constructor within this class that will create a SP object, that will create a context object, and that we will pass it to the getSP function. And this getSP function is passing the context to the SPFX. In this way PNP is communicating with SPFX. So now let's create constructor. We will tell constructor over here, and within that should have a parameter called context, and which is of type web part context. Over here I will tell that this dot underscore sp, and over here I will tell get sp, and within that we need to specify the context object. So let's specify context over here. Now over here we are passing the context object, and with the help of this line of code we are able to grab the context in this particular variable, and that we will use to communicate with the endpoint of PnpJS to perform the actual operations like create, read, update and delete. So for a time being you just remember that this is the object we are going to use. So over here semicolon. Now I will start writing the code for our all these operations. So once we get the context, the next step we need to perform all the activities. So now I start writing the code for create item. For this I am going to tell that public, this is an asynchronous function. So for this I am going to tell that async, and over here the name which we have defined is the create item, and over here I will in this function expect two parameter, item name and the item object, and then within that I am going to mention that all the operation I am going to perform within the try catch block. So I will tell try catch, and over here within the try catch block I am going to specify create operation. If you remember that we have done this into the SPE editor, same thing we are going to do it over here. So for this case I am going to tell that IAR, which is of type once item is get created it should return this value, which is of type item add result, and over here I will tell that await, because we are doing the asynchronous programming and we are using the async method, and over here we are mentioning that provide me the result once it is gets processed. Now next we need to write this dot underscore sp, this is our context, and from the context I am telling that the web, we call that lists dot set by title. I want to perform the operation on the list which we are passing in this particular function. I will tell that get by title. Over here specify the list name, and on this list I want to add the item. So I am telling that items dot add, and what data we want to add it, that is coming inside this item object. So I need to specify over here item object. Once it is being done, then we will tell that return IAR dot data dot ID. So it will return me the newly created item and its ID. So it will return me the ID of newly created item, and if in case any error happen I would tell that promise, make sure that you are using the capital P promise over here. This is the object. I will tell that promise dot reject, and I will send the error, whatever the error we will get. So over here make sure that it should be error, this error. Over here we will tell return error. So we are done with the create operation. Now next we need to define the method for reading the item, that is get item. So let's do it. For this case I am going to write again public, which is of type async, and here I will tell get item, and now I will perform read operation. So how we will do that, let's look into that. So for this case again I am going to write inside the try catch block, so in case I can handle the error easily. So I will tell here try, make sure that you are going to use this one, this snippet, so that you will get the try catch body, and within that body we are going to write const items. I want all the items which is returned from the PNP I want to store it over here, and this should holds the array because we are getting multiple values from the list. So that's the reason we are creating an array variable, and over here we need to write a wait because we are using the async method as we are working in asynchronous environment, because we don't know when we will get the result. So that's the reason we are telling that till the time it is not being processed, you should wait for it. That's the reason we are writing the await keyword over here. Then we need to write this again, the object sp object web. This context is having the information about all the context where this particular web part is existing, and web part exists into a site, and that we are accessing through this web object. If you remember that all the sites within SharePoint from the object model is accessed through the web object, and this web holds the list. It has multiple lists, and that's the reason you are telling that okay, which list, and then you are telling that this list, and here you are specifying the title of the list. And what is the title of the list? That we are specifying the name of the list over here. So this get by title holds the name of the title. So here we are mentioning that this list, that is list name. And from this list I want all the item. For that reason we are telling that item. Now we are done with the get item, but make sure that you should be returning the item, because whenever we will call this get item functionality, it should return the data, and that's the reason you have to write the return statement over here. Now it is being done. Now again, in case of error, you have to return that error. So I will copy paste this line of code. Now we are done. Now the third functionality, which is update. For update case also we have already declared it. Now we will define the body for update function. So I will tell public async update item. Within that we need to write the code for update item. For update item, again we are going to use the try catch block so that we can handle the code properly. And within that list, I'm going to create a variable that holds the reference of the list over here. Because of that reason, I'm telling that const list this dot underscore sp dot web. From web lists, tell that list which list, that I'm going to grab it through this method get by title, and within that I will specify the name of the list that we are capturing through this particular parameter. So I will tell that list name over here. Once it is being done, then we grab the list reference. Now next we need to perform the update operation on the items. So for this case I will tell const I equal to await lists dot items dot get by id. So we are having multiple items, but which item we want to perform the operation? For that case we need to specify the id of the item. So there is a method available within the PNP. We must have to use that is get by id, and within that we need to tell item id which we are passing through this parameter. So we are specifying over here, and then we are telling that I want to update it. So here we are telling update. There is a method from the PNP, we are calling that function, and within that function what are the values we want to update, that we are passing through this object. So I will tell item obj object, and once it is being done we will return the item id. Tell return item id. Now if in case of any error due to network issue or whatever it is, we need to return that error. So we will copy this line of code and paste it over here. So now we are done with the update operation. Now the next operation we need to perform is delete operation. So for delete operation, we need to write public async delete item. And over here, we need to write the code like this. First, we will use the try catch block to write the code properly to handle error scenario. So over here, I will mention const list. Over here, I will get the list reference again, and I will tell this dot context object sp. Within that web, I want to access the web, and from the web, I will access the lists. From the list, which list? Get by title, which list, and I am passing through the parameter. So list name over here. Once it is being done, then I will tell const I equal to await list dot items dot get by id. So item id we are passing it through the parameter. As you know that I'm going to use that one. And what you want to perform, this time I want to perform delete operation. So I will tell delete over here. Once it is being done, we will simply tell that return. And in case of error, if we are facing any error, then we need to return that error. So I'm telling that promise.reject error, return error. So now we are done with defining all the operations which this particular service layer will do. And this is what I wanted to demonstrate you in this session. In between, we have performed task number 4 and task number 5 together, that I can show you now. Till task 3, we have seen that how to create the PNP services, and within that we have performed task 4 where we have created the context object. If you remember, we have created the constructor, and within that constructor we are passing the context. So this is the code over here. That is our fourth step. Here we are creating the context object, and that context object we are passing to the PnpJS configuration, and then we are getting the context object reference over here. And then task 5 we have performed, where we have created create, read, update, delete operations. That is this one. So all these operations we have defined what this particular service is going to perform whenever we use it. And this is what I wanted to demonstrate you in this session. So on this note, I am stopping over here. See you in the next session. Till then, bye bye. Take care.